I knew the funeral had started when the chief financial officer called the pension freeze a small blip. He said it in the same casual tone you would use to talk about a minor printer jam or a slight delay in the delivery of office supply shipments. There was not a single word about the 3 decades I had put in, building Strata systems from 2 folding chairs, a borrowed card table, and a noisy space heater into a publicly traded juggernaut that dominated the global logistics industry. There was not even a courtesy telephone call, just a cold email. It was one of those detached, automated human resources messages that looks as though it had been spat out by a chatbot choking on corporate buzzwords regarding evolving fiscal priorities and structural alignment. The subject line read that my pension benefits were temporarily suspended, pending a cost optimization review. There was no greeting, no personal signature, and not even a proper comma splice to give it some inkling of human personality. I sat there in my quiet Ohio kitchen, my robe still slightly damp from the dryer, my morning toast completely untouched, rereading the email as if staring at it might change the cold letters on the screen. I hoped that if I looked hard enough, the words would reorder themselves into something resembling human communication. But they did not. They never do. And that was the exact moment, sitting in that dim kitchen with the refrigerator, humming like a sad jazz bass, that I realized they had already buried me. They had said their little boardroom prayers, tossed in a budget-cut flower, and moved on to appease their private equity overlords. This was not just any standard pension freeze. This was my pension. It represented 30 years of working Sundays, handling midnight server crashes, attending emergency weekend offsites, surviving corporate acquisitions, executing painful organizational firings, and leading desperate financial recoveries. I was the person they called when crucial shipping vendors walked away from contracts, when regional data centers burned to the ground in the middle of a storm, and when our very first chief operating officer tried to expense a luxury yacht and we had to plug a $6 million hole in our ledger overnight. I never asked for the public spotlight. I always preferred being the invisible scaffolding of the company, unseen but absolutely essential to keeping the structure standing. And now, I was simply omitted from their plans like a minor typo, as if 3 decades of history were just an inconvenience to their latest spreadsheet. But the new executives had forgotten one critical detail. When Gordon Vance and I first started this company in that tiny rented basement, we had nothing but a few boxes of paper, 2 folding chairs, and a shared dream. We did not have automated databases, digital archives, or human resources departments. We did the heavy lifting ourselves, manually routing orders and typing invoices on a physical typewriter. After reading the email, I stood up, walked over to the cabinet above the refrigerator, the one that no one ever looks in because it is where old product warranties, instruction manuals, and dead ink pens go to die. I reached into the back and pulled out a thick black binder. The front label had yellowed significantly with time, reading founding documents. I blew off the thick layer of dust like I was waking the dead, flipped past the early incorporation filings, the original team bylaws, the initial equity splits, and then I found exactly the document I needed. It was Clause 14D. I had written it into my original founder's agreement back in the year 1994. After my first lawyer, may the universe rest his sneaky soul, insisted on its inclusion. The clause stated that any material adverse change to the employee's compensation package shall trigger an immediate severance payout of $25 million, payable within 72 business hours. At the time we signed it, the number felt completely ridiculous. The entire company was not worth $25,000, let alone $25 million. But my lawyer Harvey had looked me in the eye and said that one day this company would get big and stupid, and when that day arrived, I would want a reliable kill switch. I thought he was just being overly dramatic. It turns out he was just early. I read the clause again, slower this time, letting the legal phrasing sink in. My finger traced the line where I had initialed in blue ink, right under the board chair's spidery signature. It was not ambiguous. It was not vague. It was a financial bomb with a 72-hour fuse, and the executives had just lit it without even realizing what they were doing. I did not scream, I did not cry, and I did not throw anything across the room. I simply closed the binder, made myself a second cup of hot tea, and opened my laptop. The email I sent to Strata Systems Legal was brief and lacked any emotional drama. The subject line read simply that Clause 14D was activated. I did not expect immediate fireworks, but I knew this much. They had stopped seeing me as a human being. They had forgotten that I had helped build the very foundation they now stood upon. They assumed I would go quietly into retirement. They were about to learn that legacy does not vanish just because you stop including it in your slide presentations, and that some contracts, especially the ones written on sweat and spite, never expire. Clause 14D was not just some random collection of words on paper. It was the quiet snarl of a forgotten founder. I stared at the scanned document, printed in that clunky old font, tucked between the dusty pages of a contract that no one in the new regime had ever bothered to read. The wording was perfect. It was not bloated with modern corporate jargon, just written with surgical precision. Any material adverse action to the undersigned's compensation shall immediately trigger a severance payout of $25 million, payable within 72 business hours. I chuckled quietly to myself, the kind of laugh that sneaks out when the universe stumbles into poetic alignment. I remembered writing that specific sentence with Harvey, the original company lawyer, back when our first office was just 4 of us, sharing a single desk and a fax machine that screamed like a demon every time it received a transmission. Harvey had told me that I would get screwed someday, and that I might as well make sure they pay me handsomely for it. We were laughing back then, drunk on cheap scotch and the smell of fresh drywall in our tiny office. I never thought I would actually have to use the clause. Honestly, I had forgotten it existed until Human Resources decided I was worth more as a line item reduction than as a human being. The clause was not tucked in a side addendum or subject to board approval. It was right there on page 19, and it had never been struck out or replaced, because nobody ever thought the quiet woman with the tea-stained blouses and the owl pin collection would actually pull the pin. But I did, with all the quiet focus of a librarian filing overdue fines in the middle of a corporate riot. I scanned the document page, took a clean screenshot of the signature block, and attached the original PDF that we had notarized back in the year 2001. Then I typed a short note to my personal lawyer, Walter Vance, who was still on retainer after all these years. The subject line read Clause 14D, just checking. That was all it took, just 5 minutes of my time. I closed my email and went about my normal workday. I watered the peace lily in my office, cleared my digital inbox, and helped rewrite a client brief that a young product manager had butchered with a thesaurus. Penelope had spent 3 days attempting to write a strategic brief for a new shipping partner in Chicago. The document was filled with empty buzzwords like synergy, paradigm shifts, and operational leverage, but it completely lacked any actual concrete logistical data. I sat down with my mug and spent 2 hours methodically stripping away the unnecessary jargon, replacing it with clear routing instructions and compliance terms. It was just another ordinary Wednesday, except this Wednesday had a corporate nuclear option hiding behind my ceramic mug. Walter called me 3 hours later. His voice sounded like gravel shifting in a leather pouch. He told me that the clause was still very active, with no rescission notice or amendment on file. He explained that since I had never converted my original founder's agreement into the new executive compensation package they introduced years ago, the company was completely trapped. I could hear him smiling through the phone, the kind of smile that comes with billable hours and someone else's panic. I told him to keep it quiet for now, as I wanted to give them a chance to insult me first. He laughed, calling me the calmest grenade in the room. He was right. I hung up the phone and started organizing my digital paper trail, gathering old board minutes, my original offer letter, and emails confirming my status over the decades. I wanted to make sure every single breadcrumb was ready. By Wednesday afternoon, the corporate amnesia was on full display. New managers had come in, got high on buzzwords and quarterly targets, and completely forgot how the floorboards got laid. They assumed loyalty expired with the version of software they used. They forgot that some of us did not just work at this company, we built it. So I sat back at my desk, looking at my highlighted clause. They had made the first move by freezing my pension, and my job now was simply to honor the contract. They wanted to cut costs, so I wanted to see how sharp their scissors really were. My formal activation message was short. It read that due to the recent freeze on my pension benefits, reference code HR 456B, I was formally invoking Clause 14D of my Founders Agreement, requesting they confirm the payout timeline and wire details. I proofread it twice, ensuring there were no exclamation points or threats. I hit send and watched the message disappear into the system. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an email from the Chief Financial Officer, Bradley Thorne. He wrote that Clause 14D was from a legacy document and was superseded in the 2014 compensation restructuring, and that their legal team agreed it was not enforceable, so they would not be processing the request. He ended the email with the word best. I stared at the screen, amazed that he could dismiss a 30-year contract like a calendar invite glitch. But he did not know that I had explicitly rejected the 2014 restructure, returning it with a signed note stating that my original founder status remained unchanged and that I would retain my standing agreement. I had the email confirmation and the delivery receipts. While I sat there, Lillian Gomez, a junior legal associate, replied to Bradley's email chain, copying me on the message. She wrote that she had located the notarized version of the original agreement from the year 2001, noting that my signature was present and that there was no formal rescission documented in the files. She added that she was still reviewing the details to confirm enforceability and would update them shortly. That was the sound of a crack forming in their defense. By lunchtime, I had received a single message from Penelope, a young project manager, asking if I could look at the language in a mission statement because it felt too old-fashioned. I gave her a simple thumbs-up emoji. Meanwhile, I was compiling my digital folder, titled Enforcement 14D, filling it with scans, emails, and meetings notes. If the board wanted to pretend the clause did not exist, I was prepared to give them a complete map. By late afternoon, the mood in the office had shifted. You would not notice it unless you were trained in watching executive faces for small tremors. But Bradley Thorne kept glancing nervously at his phone during meetings, and Penelope's second strategy meeting was mysteriously canceled. Lillian Gomez did not reply again, but someone in the legal department requested access to our oldest human resources drive. That drive had not been touched in years, and I knew that because I was the one who set it up. I finished my day by reviewing vendor contracts and approving purchase orders. No one noticed the extra glint in my eye, because when people think you are harmless, they never look for the spark under the surface. I did not want a war. I just wanted what I was owed, and if the board wanted to play dumb, I would let the facts speak for me. 3 days passed, and not a single executive from the leadership team or the legal department acknowledged my formal notice. Bradley Thorne remained completely silent, and Human Resources pretended their little pension freeze was just a temporary administrative hiccup. They hoped that if they ignored me long enough, I would simply retire or fade away quietly in the corner. They did not understand what kind of silence they had just purchased. I did not escalate the situation or shout in the hallways. I simply documented every ignored message and time-stamped every attempt to contact them. The folder on my computer was now meticulously indexed and mirrored to a private cloud server. Then, the corporate static began to show. Longtime vendors started canceling their scheduled partnership calls, and an old contact named Marshall left me a voicemail saying they had heard rumors of financial instability and were reassessing their risk exposure. For Strata Systems, the smoke was beginning to seep under the boardroom doors. That evening I was copied on an internal email by accident once again. Lillian Gomez wrote to the internal counsel that my signature was present on both the Founders Agreement and the original bylaws, and that after comparing them against the hard copy vault scans, no override or board amendment had ever been executed. She concluded that the clause was fully active. The news hit the executive suite like a silent alarm. They now knew the clause was valid, and the longer they refused to act, the more dangerous it became. I spent the evening assembling the final dossier. I gathered the board minutes from the year 2001 approval meeting, my original offer letter from July of 1994, the email chain rejecting the 2014 package, and the notarized copy of the clause itself. I even included a digitized copy of an old newspaper clipping showing myself and the other co-founder, Gordon Vance, leading the company's early expansion. My name was printed in ink before most of the current executives had even created their professional networking profiles. I saved everything to an encrypted drive and printed a physical copy just in case someone tried to delete the digital folders. At the office, everything looked normal on the surface. Penelope was still talking about corporate synergy, and Bradley was still drinking his expensive green juices. But if you listened closely, you could hear the tension tightening. Executive assistants were whispering in the hallways. Board audit meetings were being rescheduled without explanation, and security access logs showed constant activity. None of the directors spoke to me directly, but I could feel their eyes on me during meetings. They avoided my gaze out of fear. The weekly finance briefing was supposed to be a routine meeting where executives assured investors that everything was operating smoothly. I joined the call on mute, with my camera turned off and my name displayed simply as Miriam Holloway. Bradley Thorne started the meeting with his usual smug composure, claiming that the company had resolved a minor contractual inquiry regarding a legacy agreement, asserting that it posed no material risk and had been addressed internally. He went on to say that liabilities remained well within projections and that the leadership team was committed to fiscal clarity. They were tap dancing across a minefield, trying to outrun a contract they had ignored. 12 hours after that call, my lawyer, Walter Vance, called me with an urgent update. He had received an anonymous tip through his firm's secure portal. It was a screenshot of an internal legal email written by Bradley Thorne. Walter explained that a junior developer in the IT department, someone who had recently been hired and was already disgusted by the company's toxic corporate culture, had intercepted the email chain and forwarded it. The message read that they should let me push the issue, claiming I was too old to fight them in court, and that they would stall me out until I caved or passed away. I stared at those words on my screen. I had been called many things in my career, but this was the first time someone had tried to weaponize my age against me. They treated my 30 years of keeping the company afloat as if it were just an expiration date. The anger that rose inside me was cold and permanent. I did not shout or slam my desk. I simply opened my email and drafted a message to the entire board of directors. I attached the screenshot of Bradley's email and stated that the message explicitly detailed the executive team's awareness of the contract's validity, as well as an active strategy to obstruct a lawful payout based on my age. I reminded them that Clause 14D had been confirmed as enforceable and remained active. I pointed out that their actions represented not only a breach of internal ethical conduct, but a documented attempt to suppress a legal obligation through age-based discrimination, which violated the Federal Age Discrimination in Employment Act. I demanded they confirm the wire transfer instructions by Friday, warning that a failure to respond would result in the filing of injunctive relief, the activation of compound interest, and the notification of their banking partners. I signed it as Miriam Holloway, founding partner. By Thursday, Bradley Thorne had cleared his calendar, and the finance channels went completely silent. One director's assistant asked if I would be attending the next strategic retreat, and I replied that it would depend entirely on their compliance with their own bylaws. They were no longer ignoring me. They were terrified. By Friday morning, the tension inside the company's glass tower had reached a critical point. The legal team had stopped replying to routine emails, indicating that panic had set in. Bradley Thorne was nowhere to be found, with no activity on his calendar or internal logs. He had been pulled into emergency damage control meetings with external counsel, a high-priced firm from New York that specialized in corporate crisis containment. These lawyers believed in non-disclosure agreements as if they were spiritual doctrine, but even they could not write their way out of Clause 14D. The contract was too specific and did not allow for arbitration or board review. The clause was a financial trap, and the executives had stepped right into it. When their external lawyers finally sent a response, it was filled with pages of complicated legal jargon, claiming they disputed the applicability of the clause. My lawyer, Walter Vance, did not waste time reading the entire message. His reply was only 5 words: injunction request filed, clock running. That same afternoon, our internal server logs were subpoenaed, meaning every email and Slack thread containing the words freeze or too old was locked in a compliance vault. The phrase cost-cutting had suddenly become forbidden within the office, and finance spreadsheets were being rewritten to avoid regulatory audits. Then, the investors began to notice. A legacy fund partner named Lawrence Stinson cornered me in the elevator, asking if the rumors about a $25 million penalty were true. Lawrence was a tall man in his 70s, with thick white hair and a reputation for being completely ruthless in his financial decisions. He had invested over $10 million of his fund's capital into Strata Systems years ago, and he kept a very close eye on the company's leadership. I did not say a word. I simply stood there with my hands folded, looking at the floor numbers lighting up one by one. I gave him a polite, quiet smile that confirmed everything without saying a single syllable. I could see his eyes widen slightly as he realized the magnitude of the disaster that Bradley Thorne had created. Lawrence stared at me in silence before stepping off at his floor, knowing that old money gets nervous quickly when liabilities arise. Bradley Thorne attempted one final legal maneuver, filing an internal motion to have the clause reviewed under good faith negotiation rules in an attempt to delay the payout. Walter Vance immediately filed a counter motion, and the court's decision was returned within the hour. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with 30 years of experience on the bench, read the original 2001 notarized founders agreement and compared it with the unsigned 2014 restructuring template. She did not hesitate. Within 30 minutes of receiving our filings, she issued a summary ruling, denying the company's motion to delay, declaring the clause active and interest accruing. Friday afternoon arrived like a ticking clock. The 72-hour payment window was set to expire at noon, and my bank account showed no new transactions. By 12:30, the deadline had officially passed. The company had missed the window, and by doing so, they had triggered the next section of Clause 14D, which they had clearly failed to read. The clause stipulated that a default would result in an automatic interest rate of 3.2% per business day, along with the immediate notification of third-party fiduciaries and banking institutions. Walter Vance sent the formal default notice to their Treasury liaison and compliance officers, stating that Strata Systems was officially in legal default and that all compound interest and fiduciary escalations were now active. Within an hour, the consequences of their default began to ripple through the organization. Bradley Thorne resigned from his position as Chief Financial Officer. The internal email announcement was short, claiming he was stepping down for personal reasons and thanking him for his years of service. It was a corporate lie designed to cover up the fact that his cost-cutting mistake had just created a massive financial hole. The news of his resignation spread quickly, and security restrictions were placed on all finance and legal drives to prevent data loss. I sat in my kitchen that evening, watching the steam rise from my cup of chamomile tea, feeling a deep sense of calm. The neighborhood was quiet, and the normal sounds of the afternoon carried on outside. But 30 floors above the city, the company I had helped build was struggling to manage a crisis of its own making. I did not feel a sense of joy, but I felt a complete stillness. Walter texted me later that evening, telling me they had started contacting their primary lenders. I did not reply. I simply sat by the window, remembering all the times I had been ignored, talked over, or treated as an inconvenience. They had called it a cost-cutting measure, but it was turning into an expensive lesson in corporate accountability. The fire had started, and the ledger was finally beginning to balance. On Monday morning at 9:06, the transfer was officially completed. A single line appeared on my personal bank account statement, showing an incoming wire of $25 million from Strata Systems, representing the full settlement under Clause 14D. Walter Vance confirmed the transaction minutes later, noting that the funds had cleared completely, including the accrued interest and my legal fees. Shortly after, the acting chief financial officer, Ronald Hartman, who had been promoted from within the finance department, sent me a formal email. He wrote to confirm the wire transfer, and offered an apology on behalf of the company, expressing regret for the oversight and the circumstances that had led to the dispute. He concluded by thanking me for my immeasurable contributions to the company's history. I did not send a reply. My work was already built into the very foundation of the company, in their systems, their guidelines, and the databases they used every day. They had simply forgotten my value until it cost them $25 million to remember. I packed a small bag and drove upstate to a quiet cabin near the lake, a place I had owned for years but rarely had the time to visit. There was no cell service or internet connection, just the sound of the wind through the trees and the water hitting the shore. The cabin was built from rough-hewn pine logs, situated on a quiet peninsula where the water was deep and dark. In the evenings, the wind would sweep across the lake, rustling the leaves of the old oak trees that surrounded the deck. I sat on the wooden deck with my leather notebook, which was filled with years of notes, warnings, and observations from my time in the corporate world. On the final page, I wrote a single sentence: "They built the company on my back, and I left with what I was owed." The conflict was over, and they would remember my name, not because I had tried to destroy what we built, but because I had shown them the exact value of my presence. The financial impact of the default was severe for Stratasys. Their primary credit line of $80 million was temporarily frozen by their banking partners due to the material breach of contract, which triggered an immediate risk assessment. By the middle of the week, the company's stock price had fallen by 18% as investors reacted to the news of the legal default. Business publications began reporting on the situation. Business Insider ran a detailed front-page article written by a senior financial journalist. The piece was titled, "The $25 million Pension Blunder." It detailed how a simple attempt to cut costs by freezing a founder's retirement benefits had triggered a legacy penalty clause that threatened the company's liquidity. The next day, Bloomberg ran a similar segment, discussing the legal default and its impact on the company's credit rating. They interviewed financial analysts who pointed out that the executives' failure to read their own founding documents was an act of extreme corporate negligence. The board was forced to initiate a series of layoffs, letting go of 57 employees in an effort to stabilize their finances. It was a harsh reminder of how executive arrogance can impact the lives of ordinary workers who did nothing wrong. Bradley Thorne's career in corporate finance was effectively over, and he was quietly removed from any position of authority. Today, I sit by the lake and watch the sun go down, feeling a sense of peace that I have not felt in decades. My daughter's medical expenses are fully covered, and my family's financial future is secure. I no longer have to prove my worth to executives who only value spreadsheets. The company is behind me, and the lesson has been taught.